It was far too late to be answering the phone, and although Jessica couldn't pinpoint the exact time, she knew it was well past the hour when anyone should be calling. Even if it was Ethan's phone ringing, she wasn't in any mood to pick it up. She buried her face deeper into the pillow and muttered, "Thanks a lot." Just as she was starting to drift off, the relentless ringing began again. Cursing under her breath, she forced her eyes open. "Ethan, pick up your damn phone!" she shouted, only to suddenly remember that her husband wasn't beside her. The clock on the nightstand read 3:37 a.m. As she grabbed her phone, confusion over Ethan's absence began to set in. He had been there when they went to bed. "Hello?" she mumbled groggily into the receiver. "Is this Jessica Parker?" a voice asked from the other end. "Yes, this is she," replied, still struggling to wake up. "Who's calling?" "This is the emergency room at Northtown Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago. We had your contact information from a previous incident," the voice explained. "Can you come to the hospital right away? There's been a car accident." "Oh God, is he okay?" Jessica's voice trembled with fear. "I'm not authorized to give out details about his condition over the phone, ma'am, but it's important that you come immediately," the caller urged. "Of course, I'll be there as fast as I can," Jessica promised, quickly heading upstairs to her daughter's room. Dallas, named after the city where she was conceived, was a local university student who chose to live at home to save on expenses. She had enjoyed dorm life during her freshman year, but soon realized it wasn't ideal for her studies. "Dal, wake up!" Jessica called, gently shaking her daughter's shoulder. Dallas, still half asleep, struggled to focus her blurry vision. "Your father's been in an accident and is in the emergency room. Get dressed. We need to leave now," Jessica urged, already pulling clothes out for Dallas. Once dressed, they rushed out the door. Dallas fired off a flurry of questions during the drive, but Jessica had very little to offer in response. The trip, which only took about 10 minutes due to light traffic, felt like it stretched on forever. When they finally arrived at the hospital, they were struck by the sight of Ethan, unconscious and heavily bandaged. As they filled out the necessary paperwork, a nurse remarked coldly, "Your grief doesn't excuse you from completing this paperwork." Dallas moved her chair closer to her father's bed, and they sat in silence for what felt like an eternity until a man and a woman in police uniforms entered the room. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Karen Mitchell, and this is Officer David Barnes. We were the first responders at the scene," Officer Mitchell introduced herself. "Do you have any updates on his condition?" Jessica asked, her voice filled with worry. "We haven't received any updates yet," Officer Barnes replied. "This is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you a few questions." "I know it's a difficult time, but it's important to address these matters now," Jessica explained. "Of course. Can you tell us where your husband was before the accident?" Officer Mitchell asked. "He was at home. We went to bed around 10 p.m. I didn't realize he had left until the hospital called," Jessica said. "Dallas, can you confirm this?" Officer Barnes asked. "Yes, we finished watching a movie around 10 and then went to bed. I saw Dad go to the bedroom with Mom," Dallas confirmed. "Were there any significant problems like financial or marital issues?" Officer Mitchell inquired. "No, nothing out of the ordinary for married life, no specific problems," Jessica replied. "I'm just puzzled as to why he left without telling me," she added. "Were there any injuries in the other vehicle?" Jessica asked. "That's the peculiar part, Mrs. Parker. It was a single-car accident. Witnesses reported that your husband's car was traveling normally, then suddenly accelerated into a tree. There were no skid marks, and nobody saw brake lights," Officer Barnes explained. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Jessica and Dallas exchanged worried glances. "Are you suggesting my husband might have done this on purpose? That he might have tried to end his own life?" Jessica's voice quivered with disbelief. "We'll need to check the car for any possible mechanical issues, and we'll also need to speak with your husband once he's awake. It's one of the possibilities we're considering," Officer Mitchell said. "Are you sure there weren't any significant issues?" Jessica asked. "Officers, my husband and I have a strong marriage. I can't think of any issues that would have led to this. I believe it was just a loss of control, or maybe he fell asleep at the wheel. It was very late," she said before breaking down in tears. Officer Mitchell left her card on the table, urging them to contact her if they remembered anything else, and then left the hospital. Dallas closed the door to Ethan's room and asked, "You didn't tell them?" No, Dallas, I didn't, her mother replied, wiping her tears away. It's not their concern and doesn't relate to the accident. Your father wouldn't want that. Maybe he'll mention something when they talk to him. We'll find out then. The days that followed dragged on painfully. Ethan remained unconscious in the hospital, while Jessica and Dallas stayed by his side as much as possible, ensuring he was never alone. Jessica also contacted Ethan's employer to explain his absence, without implying anything about self-harm. The accident happened on a Saturday night, and Ethan's signs of waking up didn't appear until Wednesday morning. By noon, he had managed to open his eyes slightly, though he could only look around. Noticing his awakening, Jessica approached the bed, ready to offer comfort. Not long after, a nurse rushed into the room upon seeing the alert on the monitors. Jessica took the opportunity to return to her seat, allowing the nurse to attend to Ethan. Shortly afterward, more doctors arrived to evaluate Ethan's condition. Seizing the chance, Jessica stepped outside to call Dallas and let her know that her father had finally awakened. With no answer from her daughter, she left a voicemail. As most of the medical equipment was being removed, Jessica noticed that Ethan's left arm was clearly broken. However, since he was right-handed, it shouldn't be a major impediment. His throat was irritated from the intubation, so a whiteboard was provided for him to communicate. After reading Ethan's message, the nurse confirmed it with a nod from Ethan. The nurse then left to consult with her colleagues while tests continued. Mrs. Parker, I'm sorry, but your husband has requested that you and your daughter not be allowed in his room, the nurse announced. What? He's my husband. I have every right to be with him, Jessica protested. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Parker, but the patient's wishes take priority. I'll speak with him to see if we can resolve this, the nurse said reassuringly. Jessica tried to push past the nurse but was stopped. Frustrated, she began shouting, Ethan, please talk to me. What's going on? Mrs. Parker, please keep your voice down. You're disturbing the other patients. You can wait outside. However, if you try to enter the room or cause any more disruption, we'll have to ask you to leave. Is that clear? The nurse warned sternly. Yes, of course, Jessica reluctantly agreed, realizing she had no other choice. Dallas arrived at the hospital shortly afterward and found her mother waiting outside the room. Mom, why are you still out here? Dad's forbidding us from seeing him. Why me too? I can understand why he wouldn't want you in there, but why me? And why did it take you so long to get here? Jessica asked, her frustration evident. I had just woken up when Matthew came by to check on me. We're kind of a thing now. I chose to be with him instead of coming here for Dad, Dallas explained, showing no remorse. I was really stressed out and needed some time to relax. It helped. You should call him too if you get a chance. I won't be doing that. Let's not discuss this right now. It's disrespectful, Jessica retorted, though she noticed the irony in her own words as Dallas let out a chuckle. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and a tall, striking brunette entered. She was dressed professionally, but not in medical attire, though her badge identified her as hospital staff. Good morning, Mr. Parker. I'm Dr. Reed, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling? She greeted. As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's been 9 days since the accident, Ethan responded, now able to speak without the aid of a whiteboard. He asked about his discharge date but received no clear answers. The hospital asked me to speak with you. If you want to go home soon, I need to assess you for discharge, Dr. Reed explained. Dr. Reed took a seat beside the bed and crossed her legs, taking a few minutes to review Ethan's documents. So, you were admitted just over a week ago after colliding with a tree. I also see that you've requested no visits from your wife and daughter. I suspect there's a connection there, she said. Ethan nodded. She was unfaithful, he admitted. Unfortunately, infidelity is quite common nowadays, though it rarely leads to such drastic responses. Is there more to this story? Dr. Reed probed. Ethan hesitated for several moments, clearly uncomfortable discussing it, especially with an attractive woman. He wondered if there was a male psychiatrist available. Dr. Reed waited patiently, used to such reluctance. Finally, Ethan began. I think I've been dealing with depression, though it was never formally diagnosed. I just felt low, whether because of something specific or just generally. And then there was an issue with my sexual performance that started about a year after a previous accident. I see. It's possible she was aware of this, maybe even had access to your medical history. She might have been waiting for you to admit it, Dr. Reed suggested. It wasn't even an accident. I was in the back seat. My boss was in the passenger seat, and his boss was driving. We were rear-ended. There weren't any airbags or major damage, but I was caught off guard and hit my head on the seat in front of me. I think that's what caused the issue, Ethan explained. The report shows you suffered a blow and a mild concussion. My medical team couldn't pinpoint the exact cause, Dr. Reed clarified. None of the treatments worked. They ran countless tests, some repeatedly, and all they could determine was that something happened that damaged part of my brain. As a result, I couldn't perform sexually, which led to my wife becoming dissatisfied and having an affair. This eventually wore me down and contributed to the accident, Ethan summarized. In essence, yes, Dr. Reed confirmed. How long had it been since you discovered your wife's infidelity? Dr. Reed asked. I think it was around 7 or 8 months. We tried to address the issue through various means, seeking help, Ethan responded. Yes, I'm familiar with the process, Mr. Parker. I've had intimate relationships before, Dr. Reed said. Of course. I'm sorry if I seemed uncomfortable, Ethan admitted. No need to apologize. Initially, everything seemed okay, and we hoped my condition would improve. We even talked about spending entire weekends in bed together, but that never happened. Eventually, the situation dragged on so long that she decided to look for fulfillment elsewhere, Ethan recounted. Did she discuss this decision with you beforehand? Dr. Reed inquired. No, I only found out when I came home early from work, Ethan said. And not only was she with her lover, but my daughter and her boyfriend were there too, he added. Did they engage in any group activities? Dr. Reed asked, a hint of shock in her voice. No, thankfully. Jessica and Jake were in the bedroom while Dallas and Matt were in the living room. That's how I discovered the affair, and it seemed like my daughter was aware of and okay with it, Ethan explained. That explains why your daughter was also excluded, Dr. Reed observed. Yes. Oh, and if I haven't mentioned it, Jake is Matt's father. We knew him only as our daughter's boyfriend's father. Later, I found out that it was Dallas who suggested Jake to her mother. It was just another blow, Ethan added. Did you confront them about it? Dr. Reed asked. Not exactly. If Dallas hadn't been there, I might have confronted Jessica, but I'd already seen enough. So I just left, Ethan recounted. What happened in the conversation that followed? Dr. Reed asked. It didn't go as I had hoped. She expressed regret that I found out, but made it clear that if I couldn't meet her needs, she would look elsewhere. She wanted a committed partner, rather than being left alone to find someone new. Jake was single and had similar needs, so he became her choice, Ethan explained. And your reaction? Dr. Reed pressed. What could I do? She was right that I couldn't be intimate. It wasn't her fault, so she did what she felt she had to do, Ethan concluded. If, hypothetically, she had discussed it with you beforehand, would you have agreed? Dr. Reed asked. I've thought about that a lot. Part of me wanted to say yes because I loved her and wanted her happiness, but ultimately I don't think I could have agreed. We made vows, promises to each other, including through sickness and health. I couldn't betray that, so I couldn't accept her betrayal, Ethan reflected. Obviously, she continued seeing him. I'm not sure if she increased the frequency, since I don't know how often they met before, but initially, it was only when I was at work. Later, it extended to weekends and even shopping trips where she clearly spent time with Jake, Ethan recounted. That must have been incredibly difficult, Dr. Reed sympathized. Incredibly difficult doesn't begin to cover it. Once again, I felt powerless. She deserved closeness, but I couldn't provide it. It was tearing me apart, Ethan admitted. Tell me about the night of the accident, Dr. Reed prompted. We all watched a movie together. I kept my pain to myself. In hindsight, it might have been a mistake, but I didn't want to burden Jessica or Dallas. They exchanged goodnight kisses, while I just got a brief night from Dallas. That's when I realized she had lost all respect for me as a father and a man. I could hardly blame her. I didn't respect myself either. I went to bed as usual, with Jessica doing the same. Every night followed the same routine, Ethan recalled. I waited until Jessica was asleep, then dressed, grabbed my wallet and keys, and went upstairs to check on Dallas. She was asleep. I gave her a kiss and said goodbye. I got into my car, knowing there were airbags, but convinced that if I hit hard enough, they wouldn't matter. I had no specific plan, just drove aimlessly. Passing by the large oak tree, I noticed there were no obstacles and a clear path. On a second pass, I headed straight for it, Ethan concluded. Both he and Dr. Reed sat in silence as they absorbed the grim story. Finally, Dr. Reed broke the silence. "Mr. Parker, I want to thank you for your honesty and openness. It's quite rare. I'll leave you to rest and reflect on what you've shared with me. Is it all right if I come back tomorrow?" she asked. "I'm not planning on going anywhere," he replied with a touch of sarcasm. They shook hands, and Dr. Reed left the room. Ethan retrieved his cell phone, which he had left at home that night, and later brought by Jessica. Despite her protests, he answered several messages and emails, updating his boss on the latest developments before closing his eyes in an attempt to sleep. Back at home, Jessica struggled to keep her composure. She had initially thought Ethan was accepting of her relationship with Jake, seeing it as a gesture of love. However, doubts began to surface as she reconsidered the incident. She could no longer dismiss it as merely an accident and worried about potential police inquiries regarding her affair with Jake. Although Jessica knew extramarital affairs weren't illegal, she was anxious about their potential impact on Ethan's situation. She feared that the authorities might interpret his accident as a deliberate act of self-destruction and close the case. She couldn't recall Ethan ever showing indifference to her affair, and she wasn't willing to accept a life of celibacy simply because someone had framed her husband's boss. Jessica was determined to be more sensitive to Ethan's emotions and to keep her distance from Jake, but she wasn't ready to end her relationship with him. The next morning, Dr. Reed arrived as promised. Ethan noticed the subtle changes in her attire, but remained subdued. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Parker?" Dr. Reed asked, her tone professional yet warm. "Not much different from yesterday, Doc," Ethan replied. "Are you ready to go home?" she inquired. "I suppose so, but ultimately it's up to you," he said. "Well, partially yes. However, state law mandates that you remain here for 72 hours after our conversation started, so you have at least 2 more days," Dr. Reed explained. "Fair enough. At least the food here isn't too bad," Ethan joked, trying to lighten the mood. They shared a brief laugh. "An oldie but a goodie," Dr. Reed said with a smile. "I'm glad to see you're finding a way to joke about things." "It's been a while since I felt like myself. I used to crack jokes all the time, even if it annoyed Dallas," Ethan reflected. "Have you had any more troubling thoughts? Any lingering dark places in your mind?" Dr. Reed asked gently. "No, not really. I spent a year feeling down, but lately, it's been more about anger and disappointment. Disappointed in Jessica and Dallas, especially Jessica. But more than that, I'm disappointed in myself for not standing up and making it clear that her actions were unacceptable," Ethan admitted. "Do you plan to take a stand now?" Dr. Reed asked, her curiosity evident. "Absolutely. I'm tempted to file for divorce, but I recognize my own part in letting things get this bad. However, if Jessica agrees to end things with Jake, I'm willing to try counseling and work on our marriage," Ethan declared. "I admire your resolve, Mr. Parker. Such a swift change is uncommon," Dr. Reed acknowledged. "I've had a lot of time to think while lying here. I appreciate you listening and letting me express myself. It's helped me sort through my thoughts," Ethan said appreciatively. "That's excellent to hear, Mr. Parker. I'll finish up for today and I'll see you one more time tomorrow. I don't foresee any issues with your discharge," Dr. Reed concluded. "Looking forward to it, Doc," Ethan replied. Jessica and Dallas were there to pick him up when he was discharged. If he wanted to make a change, he needed to act as if change was imminent. The airbags had performed better than Ethan had expected, but the concussion was the worst part, requiring significant rest in a dark room. With the TV off and soft music playing, his wife and daughter took care of him. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Jessica brought up the need to go shopping. "No," Ethan said firmly. "What do you mean, no?" Jessica responded, confused. "Ethan, we need items including your healing creams. Make a list for Dallas. She can handle it," Jessica insisted. "Why drag me into this, Dad? Besides, I have plans with Matt," Dallas interjected. "Then you'll have extra motivation to finish quickly, won't you?" "Jessica, make the list," Ethan insisted. "This is ridiculous, Ethan. You can't just come home and change everything. Dallas has plans, and I'm going shopping. End of discussion," Jessica argued. "Do you think I'm a fool, Jessica?" Ethan challenged. "A fool? No, Ethan. Why would you say that?" Jessica asked, bewildered. "Do you really think I don't see through these shopping trips as just a cover to see Jake? I've noticed how you avoid my gaze, how your appearance has changed slightly. It's all a bit off. You've been seeing Jake, and that needs to stop," Ethan declared. Jessica's shock was palpable, and Dallas regarded her father with newfound respect. "Ethan, we've been over this. I'll try to be more discreet, but I won't give up seeing him. I have a right to my own life and I plan to live it," Jessica said defiantly. "So our vows mean nothing to you? In sickness and in health? This is part of the sickness. You don't just abandon someone. You'll stop seeing Jake immediately. If you don't agree to counseling to fix our marriage, I'll call a divorce lawyer on Monday," Ethan said resolutely. "You won't do this, Ethan Parker. Don't you dare threaten me. If I could be intimate only with you, I would. But circumstances won't allow it. It's not my fault I wasn't involved in the accident. My intimate life is over, and I'm not just going to accept it. I'm going shopping, seeing Jake, and taking care of my needs. If you want to talk about it tonight, we can. But don't think you can control what I do," Jessica said before storming out, slamming the door with such force that it rattled the windows. The room fell into a heavy silence. Father and daughter exchanged a brief, heavy glance before Ethan retreated to his bedroom. For the first time, Dallas Parker was deeply concerned about her family's future, especially her parents' troubled marriage. She had never seen such a serious issue between them before, and her father had never directly confronted her mother about their problems. Feeling helpless and unsure of her role, Dallas decided it was best to leave their issues to them and went to meet Matt. In the meantime, Jessica harbored a troubling hope that Ethan wouldn't recover fully, as she wasn't sure she could end her relationship with Jake. Jake was insistent and aggressive, never considering if his actions were suitable for her. He simply acted on his desires. As evening fell, Dallas returned home to find her father resting in his room. A faint light was glowing from the bathroom, the door slightly ajar. Dallas realized her father needed some soft illumination, though none of the room's lamps provided such a gentle light. "Dad?" she called softly. He remained turned away but responded, "Dallas, I'm sorry." Her words made him sit up and turn toward her, noticing her tears as she stood in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked, his concern evident. "I'm sorry for what I did," Dallas began, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to help Mom. She was so upset about what happened to you and, well, you know. And Matt's dad has been struggling too since Mrs. Thompson passed away. I thought they could support each other. I didn't consider how it might affect you." Ethan was taken aback by her confession. It might have been a tactic, but he chose to take her words at face value. If he was being deceived again, he'd deal with it. "Is that what you were doing that night?" he asked, trying to process her explanation. "Yeah, mostly," Dallas admitted. "I was feeling pretty down because, you know." They shared a brief, understanding smile. "But it's over now, Dally. I won't let it happen again," Ethan reassured her. "I hope so. I really need you. Are you going to get a divorce from Mom?" she asked hesitantly. "I haven't decided yet, honey. But if she doesn't end things with Jake, I don't see how we can move forward. But keep this between us. She needs to want to change, not just do it because she's forced to," Ethan said firmly. "Okay, Dad. I'm heading upstairs now." "Oh, and I broke up with Matt tonight," Dallas added, her voice filled with a mix of relief and sadness. Ethan was surprised. He hadn't particularly liked Matt, but he was taken aback by Dallas's decision, especially given her apparent feelings for him. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Because you once told me he wasn't good enough for me, and I finally realized you were right." "I see now that you were right about a lot of things," Dallas said, a smile forming as she acknowledged her father's wisdom. Ethan's face lit up with pride. His daughter had shown a lot of maturity. Dallas approached her father and hugged him, their first embrace in a long time. They pulled away, sharing a heartfelt smile before Dallas quietly left the room. Ethan heard the soft click of Dallas's bedroom door as she went upstairs. The moment of warmth he had just experienced evaporated when he heard Jessica's cheerful voice as she unlocked her car. He lay back on his bed, closing his eyes in frustration. When Jessica entered the bedroom, she had clearly showered at Jake's place. Ethan couldn't resist a comment. "It's better you come back smelling fresh rather than, well, you know." "Could you help with the groceries, please? Did you get everything on the list?" Ethan asked as he sat down. "Yes, I got everything," Jessica replied. Ethan unloaded the groceries onto the counter and noticed there were no perishables. Checking the receipt, he saw that Jessica had left the store nearly 2 hours ago. "I went shopping first and then visited Jake," Jessica said, her tone defensive. Despite expecting this, Ethan was still hurt. After unpacking the groceries, he retreated to his bedroom, contemplating whether it was worth reopening the conversation. It seemed pointless. Jessica had made her stance clear. Change was necessary. "Do you want to talk more about this?" Jessica asked, her tone suggesting it might be futile. "No, Jessica. Your position is clear," Ethan said firmly. Her expression softened as she looked at him with a mixture of affection and frustration. She believed that her pursuit of personal fulfillment, given their circumstances, should be acceptable, hoping he would eventually come around. With a resigned nod, Jessica went to her closet, considering rekindling their relationship, but not tonight. By the time she was ready for bed, Ethan appeared to be asleep or was pretending convincingly. The divorce proceedings were contentious. Jessica was seething with anger and had enlisted an aggressive attorney who was exploring every possible angle, including attempting to declare Ethan mentally unfit due to the supposed self-destructive behavior. Anticipating these tactics, Ethan began counseling the same week the legal process started, determined to address his issues and prepare for the challenges ahead. The psychologist Ethan consulted was highly respected, and his testimony affirming Ethan's mental stability played a crucial role in swaying the judge. Although the legal battle could have dragged on, Dallas stepped in decisively as Jessica seemed ready to escalate things further. She firmly reminded her mother that her actions went against the family vows and obligations they had promised to uphold. Despite the harshness of the situation, Dallas emphasized the importance of standing by one another through all trials. She warned Jessica that any further resistance would irreparably damage their mother-daughter relationship. Faced with the possibility of losing both her husband and her daughter, Jessica relented and withdrew her opposition to the divorce. The house was sold, and Ethan agreed to a reasonable alimony arrangement, knowing it was a concession that the court would likely mandate anyway. Jessica moved into a 2-bedroom apartment close to her workplace and returned to full-time employment about 8 months after the divorce. The separation left her bitter, especially when Jake ended their relationship, revealing that he had been involved with other women. Jessica's appeal diminished once she was no longer married. Meanwhile, Dallas continued her education and divided her time between her parents. Over time, Jessica adopted a victim mentality, persistently blaming Ethan for the divorce. Whenever Dallas overheard her mother's complaints about Ethan, she would snap back, "Did you even consider Dad?" On a Friday night, around 10 p.m., Ethan walked into a dimly lit club, hoping for a brief escape from his troubles at home. He was looking for a simple diversion, a couple of drinks and maybe some dancing. Settling onto a bar stool, he ordered a rum and coke. As he sipped his drink and scanned the crowd, he noticed a woman at the far end of the bar who seemed oddly familiar, though he couldn't quite place her. She had dark brown flowing hair and wore a revealing dress, with a nearly empty wine glass in front of her. Trying to recall where he had seen her before, Ethan was struck by a sudden memory. A faint smile crossed his face as he picked up his drink and approached her. "Dr. Reed?" he ventured. She looked up, studying his face for a moment before she replied. "I leave Dr. Reed at the hospital. Out here, I'm Nicole, but I'm afraid you have the advantage here. It's been a while, and I'm sure you meet many patients, whereas I see fewer exceptional psychologists. Names stick with me better than faces." "Test me," Ethan challenged, watching her closely. Nicole seemed to think for a moment, and Ethan could almost see the realization dawning on her. "Ah, Mr. Parker, the man with a cheating spouse and a rather abrupt encounter with a tree, if memory serves." "You've got it right," Ethan said, surprised. "It's strange that we've only spoken twice, nearly 2 years ago." "Indeed. Won't you join me?" Nicole offered. Ethan settled in, signaling the bartender to refill their glasses. "Thanks, I'm game. So what brings you out tonight? Seeing someone special?" "Trying to," Nicole replied, her eyes sparkling with an unmistakable hint of flirtation. "Really? I remember seeing a rather impressive rock on your finger. Or was I mistaken?" Ethan inquired, curious. "Not long after my divorce was finalized, I kept wearing my rings, hoping to make my ex-husband realize how little he had in common with a 20-year-old cashier, aside from wanting her friend to join them in bed. Unfortunately, I didn't succeed," Nicole revealed, her tone tinged with bitterness. "Good Lord, are they still together?" Ethan asked, surprised. "Surprise, Mr. Parker, but I lost interest in Mark's love life post-divorce. No idea. A silly question, I admit. And please, just call me Ethan." Spare me the formalities, she said. What did your husband call you? Ethan asked, intrigued. Ethan or Ethan if you prefer. Care to hit the dance floor with me? Nicole asked, her voice filled with renewed interest. Sure, Ethan agreed, instructing the bartender to look after their drinks before leading Nicole to the dance floor. They moved together effortlessly to the fast beats of the music. As the music transitioned to a slower rhythm, they continued dancing closely. Nicole wrapped her arms around Ethan's neck while he held her securely, his hands firm against her back. He quickly noticed the absence of a bra under her dress. Their eyes met briefly before Nicole rested her head on his shoulder, and they continued to sway gently to the music. When the song ended and the music grew softer, Nicole seized the moment to lean in close. Ethan, I've had my fill of dancing, but I'm also feeling quite alone. If you catch my drift, she murmured in his ear. How about I take you home and we address that? Ethan suggested, gripping her hand and guiding her back to the bar. After settling the tab and informing the bartender they were done, Ethan led Nicole to his car. Nicole, I should have asked earlier, how much have you had to drink? I only had 1 glass of wine at the bar, she replied. When you first arrived? Just making sure because I don't take advantage of intoxicated women. Don't worry, Ethan, Nicole reassured him. Arriving at his underground garage, Ethan and Nicole took the elevator up to his floor. Throughout the ride, Nicole clung to him, their lips meeting in heated, passionate kisses. Once they reached his apartment and the door closed behind them, Nicole wasted no time. She swiftly removed her dress, revealing her striking figure. Oh, Nicole, you look absolutely stunning, Ethan said, admiring her. Thank you, Ethan, she replied, a playful glint in her eyes. But are you just going to admire me? I hope not. Lead me to your bedroom. Ethan took her hand and guided her down the hallway, feeling a sense of relief that Dallas was away for the weekend at her mother's. I hope you have contraceptives, Nicole said. Indeed I do, Ethan assured her, retrieving some from his bedside drawer and placing them on the nightstand. After over an hour of passionate lovemaking, they lay together in a blissful state, not quite asleep, but deeply relaxed. Ethan felt rather than saw Nicole lift her head. Ethan, I just recalled the issue of erectile dysfunction from your story. Did that ever get resolved? Thankfully, it's no longer a problem, Ethan said. What happened was a bit unusual. A couple of months after the accident with the oak tree, I began to feel a tingling sensation, almost like a paralyzed limb waking up. This continued for several weeks. Were you still married? Did you talk to your wife about it? Nicole asked. Technically, yes, we were still married, but we had been living apart for a while. And no, I didn't discuss it with her. It didn't seem relevant. Over the following months, I started experiencing morning erections more frequently, even during the day. After about 8 or 9 months, everything returned to normal. And what did the doctors say? Nicole asked. They couldn't provide a definitive answer. Despite numerous tests and scans, they couldn't pinpoint any specific cause. They speculated that the impact from the tree might have somehow resolved the issue, but it remains uncertain, Ethan explained. Well, I guess I'm fortunate, Nicole said. Would it be all right if I stayed the night? Sure, Ethan replied. Are we planning to have another round in the morning and then grab breakfast together? As they settled in for the night, Ethan had one more question. Nicole, do you feel ready for a serious relationship? There was a prolonged silence, and Ethan worried he might have overstepped. He feared she might bolt out of bed and request a ride home. Her attraction to him was undeniable, but it wasn't just physical. She was intelligent, and he enjoyed her company. Although he wasn't in love yet, she was the first woman he had seriously considered after his divorce. Can we discuss this in the morning? Nicole asked finally. Of course, Ethan said. Good night, Nicole. Good night, Ethan, Nicole replied. The next morning, Nicole woke up before Ethan and decided to let him sleep. After using his shower, she went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Ethan's question from the previous night lingered in her mind. Although she was undeniably attracted to him, she had been focused on enjoying the moment. For months, she had convinced herself she didn't need a man, which was partially true. With a good job and supportive friends, she was content. However, if she were honest with herself, she longed for companionship. But how would a decent man react to her truth? Ethan was roused from sleep by the aroma of cooking. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Nicole wearing his shirt from the previous night and an apron he kept in his closet. I was planning to invite you for breakfast, but it seems a bit late now, Nicole said with a smile. How about you invite me for lunch instead? Go get a quick shower and breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes, she added. Ethan joined Nicole in the kitchen just as she was setting up the plates. On the table were an omelet, a couple of sausages, and a piece of buttered toast. I didn't realize I had sausages in the freezer, Ethan said, surprised. They were in there. Hopefully they're still good, Nicole replied. Ethan took a bite and complimented the meal. Breakfast was a pleasant, if quiet, affair, with Ethan cleaning up afterwards since Nicole had prepared the food. Their conversation was light and easy, and once everything was loaded into the dishwasher, Ethan turned to Nicole. Are you ready to talk? He asked. Mostly, Nicole said. Listen, Ethan, I don't want to complicate things or intrude on your life. If you're only interested in a casual encounter, that's okay. You don't owe me anything. I understand, Nicole said, her tone serious. There's something I need to tell you. Can we discuss it in the bedroom? I'll feel more comfortable there. They held hands and moved to the bedroom, sitting on the bed facing each other. Nicole squeezed Ethan's hands tightly. Ethan, although we only met last night, I think you're a wonderful person, and I genuinely like you, but there's something important you should know. I mentioned that my husband left me for a younger woman, which is true, but it's not the whole story. The main reason he left was because I can't have children. He wanted a family of his own and couldn't accept adoption as an alternative. He saw our inability to have biological children as a failure on my part. I'm in my 40s with an adult daughter. While I wouldn't mind having children, it's not a deal breaker for me. Good to know, Ethan said. There's another thing I need to be honest about, Nicole continued, looking serious. After the divorce was finalized, Nicole began, her tone thoughtful. I went through a rough patch. I was grappling with my age and the fact that my husband left me for someone much younger. In case you're curious, I'm 37. I was curious, but I wasn't going to ask, Ethan replied, sharing a light chuckle. I also felt incomplete, I guess is the best way to put it. Honestly, I didn't feel like much of a woman at all. How can you feel like a woman when you can't have children? I know what you're thinking, but that's exactly how I felt at the time. So, what did you do? Ethan asked gently. I decided to reclaim my femininity. If I couldn't define it through motherhood, then I was determined to define it in other ways. I engaged in casual encounters, mostly with strangers. I adopted the alias Angela and never turned down an opportunity when I felt like it. This continued for several months until I realized it was self-destructive and sought therapy. Even then, I continued, albeit less frequently, until I reached a point where I could put an end to it. Wasn't that what you were up to last night? Ethan asked cautiously, genuinely curious, but careful not to sound judgmental. The previous night, Nicole had certainly appeared to be on the prowl. Yes, that's right, Nicole admitted. As a woman, I have needs, and sometimes I go out to fulfill them. But now, I'm more selective about who I choose. There have been many nights when I ended up going home alone and, well, taking care of things myself. I suppose I should be grateful I passed the test. Of course, Ethan, Nicole said, her tone softening. I genuinely enjoy our time together, and to answer your question, I'm keen to explore more. But I want to be transparent about my past experiences. I actually got tested recently, and fortunately, came out clean, which was incredibly fortunate. I'm not on birth control, but I can provide a note from my doctor if you need confirmation. Assuming you're open to it, I suggest we both get tested and commit to being exclusive. Ethan sat in silence for a few moments, processing her words. Nicole waited anxiously but patiently. Finally, he was ready to respond. Nicole, thank you for being so upfront. I know that couldn't have been easy. I think I owe you the same, he said, his voice steady. Our experiences aren't too dissimilar. After my divorce, I was relieved it was over, but I struggled with feelings of inadequacy. I didn't know how I'd ever find another partner, and I faced the prospect of being completely alone. My therapist pointed out that as we age, many women lose interest in lovemaking and prefer non-carnal affection. I thought I'd have to find someone much older than me, or wait a few years until things improved. Even when it seemed like everything was back to normal, I wasn't in the best shape. As you felt the need to demonstrate your femininity, I felt compelled to prove my masculinity. I went out often to pursue women, aiming to establish, at least in my own perception, my prowess. I wasn't any more selective than you. Some encounters were rather casual. Let's just say I've had my fair share of experiences. This continued for a while, but I wasn't as fortunate as you. I faced a bout of gonorrhea and had to confess to my doctor that I couldn't recall the names of my partners. We addressed everything, and through therapy, I started to examine my behavior. It's been a long time since I've engaged with a woman without protection, but I'm willing to get tested and commit to exclusivity. So, are we giving it a shot, you and me? Nicole inquired, her eyes hopeful, already knowing the answer. I suppose so, Ethan responded, acknowledging the rhetorical nature of the question. By lunchtime, Ethan's stash of contraceptives had been depleted. Their relationship had deepened, with Nicole getting along well with Dallas, and they spent every night together, hinting at a more permanent commitment. 3 months into their relationship, Ethan and Nicole decided to visit a club catering to a mature crowd. The DJ was spinning tunes, and the layout of the club facilitated conversation. They enjoyed their evening until Nicole noticed a sudden change in Ethan's demeanor. His smile vanished, and his gaze shifted past her. Curiously, Nicole followed his line of sight and saw Jessica standing across the room. Ethan and Jessica's eyes locked almost immediately. Ethan's expression turned impassive, while Jessica's face contorted into a smirk as she glided toward their table. Despite the time that had passed since their divorce, Jessica still held a grudge. She had convinced herself that her actions were justified, merely a reaction to her husband's shortcomings, though she begrudgingly admitted she could have been more discreet. As Jessica approached, her tone was laced with sarcasm. "Ethan, what a surprise to see you here," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "This is Jessica, my ex-wife," Ethan introduced, his tone strained as he tried to remain civil. "Jessica, this is Nicole." Nicole offered a polite smile. "Nice to meet you, Jessica. I've heard quite a bit about you." Jessica's eyes narrowed as she retorted, "Well, I haven't heard anything about you." Ethan interjected quickly. "Jessica, we're divorced. It's been over a year. My life is no longer your concern. Now, if you don't mind." Jessica cut him off, her eyes shifting back to Nicole. "Of course, Ethan. I wouldn't want to intrude on your date. But Nicole, there's something you should know." Nicole raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be?" "You probably shouldn't get too involved with him," Jessica said, her tone filled with a venomous edge. "We divorced because he couldn't perform." Ethan watched Nicole closely, noting her reaction. Nicole struggled to suppress a soft laugh, turning to Ethan with a raised eyebrow. "Is that true? I don't recall you mentioning it." Ethan shrugged slightly, leaving Nicole to handle the situation. Jessica, convinced she had struck a decisive blow, relished the moment. But her satisfaction was short-lived. Nicole responded coolly, "Well, that's a relief. Because if what we were doing last night wasn't satisfying, a real problem would probably finish me off." Jessica's smile evaporated instantly. Nicole and Ethan exchanged a glance, subtly mocking Jessica's feeble attempt to stir trouble. Jessica looked flustered. "What is she talking about?" Jessica demanded. "Ethan, you're not saying everything's working now, are you?" Nicole asked. Ethan replied, "It appears that Dallas didn't keep her mother updated on my situation." Nicole added, "Jessica, you're still as sharp as ever." Ethan nodded. "Just like old times." Nicole continued, "But how is this even possible? Did doctors find a cure?" Jessica pressed, her curiosity piqued. Ethan and Nicole remained silent, letting Jessica's agitation grow. Jessica, becoming more frantic, insisted, "Come on, Ethan. This issue ended our marriage. I deserve to know what was wrong." Ethan's expression hardened. "Firstly, Jessica, it was your actions that ended our marriage, not my condition. You made those choices. Secondly, you don't deserve to know anything about my personal matters. We're divorced. They're just that, personal." Jessica countered, "You can blame me all you want, but I wouldn't have done what I did if things had been normal." "All right, Jessica," Ethan said calmly. "The doctors believed that whatever the issue was, it just needed time to heal. If you had been patient and stood by me, as our vows required, we might still be married." Jessica's jaw dropped in shock as she struggled to respond. "I can't believe this. It's like fate is against me." "He's just upholding his vows," Ethan muttered. Jessica's curiosity got the better of her. "What was it?" "Nothing," Ethan said firmly. "It doesn't matter now. You know the truth. Could you please give us the rest of the evening?" After a moment of contemplation, Jessica looked at Ethan with a remorseful expression. "You're right, Ethan. I owe you an apology. My actions were selfish and short-sighted. I should have been stronger. I destroyed a good marriage. I'm truly sorry." With that, Jessica turned and left. Not only their table, but the club itself. Ethan and Nicole watched her go, a flicker of pity crossing their faces. Ethan turned to Nicole, a smile forming. "Let's dance, my love." 6 months later, Ethan and Nicole celebrated their wedding, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives.